one of the things that came out of the National Party conference yesterday is one of the reasons that we are in so much crap, both in terms of the education portfolio and what's happening in that area, and also in race relations, is because of the former National Party leader, Sir John Key. And the National Party made a dreadful mistake yesterday of inviting him, the former Prime Minister, to come to their conference. Now, I say a dreadful mistake because Key was a bad Prime Minister. He had a mandate from New Zealand to fix this country, and wherever there was a fix required, he either ran away from it or he put in place such a minute band-aid that under the most minute of pressure, it would wear away or simply be blown away. And race relations is one of those areas in which Key stands condemned as a failure, and somebody who in many ways created the problems that were able to be exacerbated by an activist Labour government from 2020 onwards. Remember, they couldn't do it. Now, here's the irony. John Key was also stupid. He condemned the National Party at the 2017 election from forming a coalition with New Zealand First. And really, New Zealand First have always been a conservative beast. I've worked for Winston Peters, I've worked with Winston Peters. And he is a conservative man, he always has been. He joined the National Party, oh God, way back in 1981. I think he was the National Party candidate from memory for Northern Maori in 1981. Now there's devotion beyond the call of duty. Before he was elected as the National Member of Parliament for Tauranga in 1984. But such was his personal animosity, John Key, towards Winston Peters, that he managed to lose National its election in 2017. And he jumped before that loss became inevitable. He gave it over to his deputy, Bill English, who promptly lost it as well. And the reason why he rejected New Zealand First as being a coalition partner was very simple. He personally disliked Winston Peters. I don't know why. They'd never worked together before. He just decided he didn't like him. And when he had a conservative, and so the National Party, when they did very well under Bill English at the election, but they didn't do well enough to win, they needed friends, had no friends at all. The National Party had no friends with which they could coalesce in 2017. We all know what happened next. Jacinda Ardern became the Prime Minister, Winston Peters became the Deputy Prime Minister, and was very much the handbrake between 2017 and 2020 when the handbrake was taken off, courtesy of the New Zealand voting public. We all know what happened over the next 3 years. And one might argue it was an activist, an ideological government from which we are still recovering, I have to say. So Key turns up a failure at the National Party conference yesterday and determines that he's going to give the National Party some advice on race relations issue. He says that the National Party needs to take the temperature down a wee bit, that the government needs to tread carefully. He spoke directly about the tensions around Maori issues to do with Act's Treaty Principles Bill and the removal of Section 7AA of the Oranga Tamariki Act, and also the National Party's decision to overrule a court decision, a High Court decision, on the Marine and Coastal Area Act. And he said, although many of the issues were not of National's making, that he should rule out the Treaty Principles Bill or anything that actually defines what the treaty means, because as I said, he obviously wants it still to be a movable feast. And he goes on to say this, and it's a sort of bland stupidity that frankly I'd expect of John Key or somebody in the early stages of dementia, possibly both. He said this, the important thing is we're all New Zealanders. And I think everybody wants to live in a place where we can respect one another, get along well, and foster a better New Zealand. So So I'd kind of encourage everyone to maybe take the temperature down a wee bit. What in actual fact John Key is saying is that I don't want you to confront hard issues, because John Key never confronted a hard issue in his life. Look at the education system. Look at the health system. Look at the state of the economy. And look at the state of race relations of this country at the moment. Look at the fact that John Key and his government endorsed at the United Nations, not knowing what it meant, because John Key's not really into detail. He's not really into a bit of academic study, are you, John? When he went off and said, why don't you go and endorse the United Nations Indigenous Rights Treaty or Covenant that we've agreed to, which unsurprisingly provoked and encouraged at an official level significant public work funded by the taxpayer that would essentially give Maori almost a separate homeland in this country. It was a direct consequence of John Key, in actual fact, endorsing that United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights. But the other thing is that if you notice what Key is saying, he also talked about last week's walkouts by an iwi leader, I think it was Ngāpuhi, from the talks with the Prime Minister, this is Luxon, and protest over government actions. He said, you should always treat race relations carefully because in the end, we all want to live in a harmonious society, and Maori are the indigenous population of New Zealand and treaty partners. So you have to treat them with respect and carefully, I think. That's what Key said. Now, what he was really saying is surrender. What he was really saying is let's not have robust discussions or debate. What he was really saying is, how can I make sure that Maori are incrementally bought off until, frankly, the increments come that you're completely bought off? What he was essentially saying was, I don't want to solve the problems that are out there, the standoff between Maori leadership and their activist demands for mana mauri haki, and democracy, the constitutional arrangements of this country, and common sense on the other. I just want us to get on. And it's a sort of pathetic non-statement that refuses to actually address the issue, which is people like John Key let the genie out of the bottle. They were, to another analogy, classical, I guess, they were Pandora. And they decided that they couldn't possibly determine what the future was going to be in this country and looks at race relations. They were going to transfer that responsibility to the court and judicial system, non-elected people who frankly didn't know any history either and had even less interest in what the public thought of this country. And then they let senior public servants, whether they were in the Ministry for the Environment or Treasury, Ministry for Education, Farmac, determine what their own version of the treaty should be, and their own interpretation, even to the point that they started adding articles of the treaty that simply aren't there. But it doesn't matter, John. You should respect Maori and just let it all go. Instead of saying, it's time for us to sit down, and now we have decided to give the Treaty of Waitangi some form of constitutional, well, not constitutional, legal status in this country. And we are talking about so-called principles that are govern us in our relationship going forward. It might be a really good idea to work out what those principles are and how this works, how the relationship works. And the interesting thing is that Key saw it as a partnership. It's not a partnership. It's never been defined as a partnership, and that's exactly what we're meant to talk about. It's always been that this government of this country, since, in actual fact, I think it was the Constitution Act of 1852, so it goes way back to the 19th century, has always said, well, we're in charge of this country. We're going to run a rudimentary democracy. That democracy increased its franchise as the decades wore on, and we're then going to have a representative democracy, which was eventually what we did get to once we allowed Maori and women the chance to vote, and we even brought down the voting age to the age of 18, so that if you like the representation has increased. We even brought an MMP to make sure we were really representative of what New Zealanders were thinking. But John Key doesn't want to talk about where Maori fit into that. He doesn't want to talk about now he's let the genie out of the bottle, that it can't be stuffed in. And he doesn't want to talk about the involvement of the courts and how they have, on a gradual and incremental nature, changed the principles of the treaty over years and decades, even to the point now where you've got Mataranga Māori and Te Ao Māori and Tikanga Māori having an input into judicial decisions that are made in this country that are nothing to do, you would have thought, with the treaty, but to do with criminal and civil issues as well. This is the legacy of John Key. This is also the man who presided over the chaos that would eventually develop in our public education system. And as I said, two of the most useless ministers of education this country's ever had before the Labour Party came along were Hikaya Parata and Antoli. Dreadful, completely run by their departments. And when all these statistics were available to them then, still did nothing. So you go ahead, National Party, and you listen to John Key, but can I say the problems will get worse, they won't get better. The divisions will become greater because the conversation and the debate and the discussion don't happen, and the differences aren't identified. And you will never have a solution if you're not courageous enough to start a decent conversation. That's John Key's legacy to New Zealand. He should shuffle off and never come back onto a stage anywhere near you soon. Those are my thoughts. What are yours?